In late 1884, in a tiny New Mexico settlement called Frisco, curious onlookers cautiously approached a bullet-riddled adobe hut. For more than 33 hours, somewhere between 40 and 80 armed cowboys had fired thousands of rounds into this structure, determined to kill the lone man barricaded inside. The walls were shredded. The door had more than 400 bullet holes. 8 slugs had been pried from a single broom handle. Yet when the smoke cleared and the young Hispanic lawman finally emerged, he walked out completely unscathed. His name was Elfego Baca. He was 19 years old, and at 5 feet 7 inches tall, he was about to become one of the most unlikely heroes in the history of the American West. This is the story of what became known as the Frisco Shootout, arguably the most unequal gunfight in the history of the American West. It's a story of teenage bravado, ethnic tension, impossible survival, and one young man's determination to prove that Hispanic New Mexicans wouldn't be intimidated by anyone, not even when outnumbered at least 40-1. Elfego Baca was born on February 10, 1865 in Socorro, New Mexico, just weeks before the end of the Civil War. According to one colorful legend, his pregnant mother was playing Las Iglesias, the Mexican version of softball, when the future lawman entered the world right there on the field. Whether that story is true or not, it captures the unexpected, dramatic nature of the life Elfego would lead. His parents, Francisco and Juana Maria Baca, moved the family to Topeka, Kansas. When Elfego was just a year old, the Civil War had drained the nation's economy, and times were tough in the territories. Francisco later claimed he wanted to give his children the benefits of education that Socorro couldn't offer. But the reality was probably simpler. They needed work, and they needed to survive. The family's time in Kansas was marked by tragedy. In 1872, within a 3-week span, Elfego's mother, his only sister, and an older brother were all claimed by a deadly plague. The boy was just 7 years old. Sometime afterward, his father Francisco departed west, taking only Elfego's eldest brother with him, leaving young Elfego behind. Elfego wouldn't return to New Mexico until 1880, after his mother's death was final, and his father had established himself as town marshal of Belen. But Francisco's career in law enforcement would be cut short in dramatic fashion. While serving as marshal, Francisco shot into a threatening mob and killed 2 men. He was tried for murder, found guilty in the 5th degree, and jailed in Los Lunas, awaiting transfer to Kansas State Prison. He never made it. According to reports, 12-year-old Elfego helped his father and 3 other prisoners escape by sawing through the ceiling of their cell. The newspapers reported details of the jailbreak, but only a few privileged souls knew of Elfego's involvement. After escorting his father to El Paso, Texas, where Francisco could slip across the international border if needed, young Elfego returned to New Mexico. He worked on isolated cattle ranches. He transported meat by wagon to Santa Fe railroad workers in the Albuquerque area. And all the while, despite, or perhaps because of, his father's troubles with the law, Elfego harbored a single ambition. He wanted to be a lawman. He wanted, he later said, the outlaws to hear my steps a block away. By 1884, at 19 years old, Elfego had settled into a relatively stable position. He worked as a clerk in a mercantile owned by Juan Jose Baca, the mayor of Socorro. The sprawling 2-story adobe structure dominated the northeast corner of Socorro Plaza, impossible to overlook with its elaborately trimmed territorial balcony and French doors shipped overland from St. Louis. A large sign on the false front read simply, Juan J. Baca. Mayor Baca paid his 19-year-old bilingual clerk $20 a month plus room and board. It was decent, steady work. And if not for what happened next, Elfego Baca might have passed into history unnoticed, just another store clerk in territorial New Mexico. In October of 1884, Pedro Saracino walked into the mercantile. Saracino was the mayor's brother-in-law, a saloon owner and deputy sheriff from San Francisco Plaza, commonly called Frisco, a Hispanic community of farmers and shepherds in the remote western reaches of Socorro County, roughly 130 miles west. Saracino confided in Elfego that all was not well in Frisco. Several Texas cattle barons and wealthy English investors had established ranches in the area. The majority of cowboys working these ranches were Texans, and some of them delighted in terrorizing Frisco's Hispanic citizenry. Their reign of terror had recently come to a head when several cowboys tortured and maimed 2 local men in Saracino's own cantina. If Saracino thought he might find a sympathetic ear in Elfego Baca, he was mistaken. The young clerk didn't offer sympathy, he offered action. "I will show the Texans," Elfego reportedly declared, "that there is at least one Mexican in the county who is not afraid of an American cowboy." What happened next depends on which account you believe. In his memoirs, Baca claimed he pinned on a mail-order sheriff's badge and essentially deputized himself before making the long ride to Frisco. Other participants insisted he was already a legally sworn deputy, campaigning in the area for the current Socorro County sheriff. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Elfego acquired some guns and a badge through methods that were, at best, informal. What's certain is this: Elfego Baca strapped on his Colt 45 with its distinctive black resin grips and rode west to Frisco, charging headlong into a situation he knew little about. What happened next would make him a legend. On October 29, 1884, inside Milligan's Whiskey Bar in Upper Frisco Plaza, a drunken cowboy named Charlie McCarty was celebrating. He brandished his pistol at Hispanic patrons, ordering them to dance for his amusement. When bar owner Bill Milligan requested Elfego's assistance, the young lawman approached McCarty with 3 local Hispanic men backing him up. McCarty's response? He shot Elfego's hat clean off his head. Standing his ground despite the hole in his hat, 19-year-old Baca flashed his badge at McCarty and informed him he was under arrest. McCarty worked for the John B. Slaughter Ranch, a notoriously rough Socorro County outfit that employed roughly 150 cowboys. Baca didn't care. He disarmed McCarty, kept his revolver, and placed him under arrest. What Baca didn't fully understand was the hornet's nest he'd just kicked. About a dozen cowboys from the Slaughter Ranch, led by the foreman young Parham, quickly gathered outside the adobe house where Baca was holding McCarty. They were armed with Winchester rifles. They demanded their friend's release. They tested the doors and windows with their shoulders, probing for weaknesses. Baca responded from inside with a warning: leave by the count of 3, or he would open fire. According to the story, the cowboys were in the process of making jokes about a Mexican's inability to count when they heard Baca call out in a single quick breath, 1, 2, 3. Then he and his friends opened fire through the door. In the chaos that followed, Baca's bullets struck young Parham's horse. The animal reared and fell backward, crushing its rider beneath its weight. Parham would die from his injuries. Another cowboy was shot in the knee. Word of the Frisco War began spreading to outlying ranches immediately. But after tense negotiations, an agreement was reached. McCarty would be tried before Justice of the Peace, Ted White, at a makeshift court in Milligan's Bar the following morning. The trial was a farce. McCarty was fined $5 and released. He immediately demanded his pistol back. Baca, still in possession of McCarty's gun and sensing the mood turning murderous, began backing toward the side door. The prudent young deputy knew exactly what was coming next. He ran. Baca fled across the plaza to a nearby jacal, a one-room structure owned by Geronimo Armijo. The building was typical of structures found scattered throughout the valley, thin cedar poles stuck into the ground and coated on both sides with an adobe mudslip. It was crude, fragile, and offered almost no protection against bullets. But it had one critical advantage. The floor inside was recessed about 18 inches below ground level, creating a natural trench that would save Elfego's life. Baca warned Armijo and his family to evacuate immediately, which they did. Then he barricaded himself inside. Historical accounts diverge on what happened next. Some sources suggest the main siege began within hours. Others indicate that the most intense phase began weeks later in December, after tensions continued to build throughout November. What's certain is that Elfego Baca refused to surrender, and the Cowboys refused to let him leave. Word continued spreading. More cowboys arrived. The mob grew to somewhere between 40 and 80 men. The exact number remains disputed, with villagers reporting about 40, while Elfego himself later claimed at least 80. Either way, the mathematics were impossible. At some point, rancher Bert Hearn from the Spur Lake Ranch was summoned to bring Baca out for questioning regarding what was now being called the murder of young Parham. When Baca refused to come out, Hearn broke down the door and ordered him to come out with his hands up. Two .45 caliber bullets immediately erupted from inside the jacal, slamming into Hearn's stomach. He staggered backward and collapsed in the doorway, dying moments later. That's when all hell broke loose. The Cowboys opened fire. Dozens of rifles and pistols unleashed a continuous storm of lead into the tiny structure. They fired from behind the adobe buttresses of a nearby church. They fired from protected positions around the plaza. When their weapons ran empty, they reloaded and fired again, and again, and again. For more than 33 hours, the siege continued without pause. Witnesses later estimated that thousands of rounds were fired at the jacal. Some accounts claim over 4,000, though the actual number is impossible to verify. What is verifiable is the physical evidence. The adobe walls were shredded with holes. The wooden door bore more than 400 bullet holes. Each one counted as evidence at trial. 8 slugs were later pried from a single broom handle. The structure looked like it had been savaged by some enormous beast. And yet, through it all, not a single bullet struck Elfego Baca. The secret to his survival was simple but brilliant. That sunken floor meant that when Elfego lay prone on the dirt, he was positioned below the trajectory of most incoming fire bullets, slammed into the walls above him, tore through the wooden roof, and shredded everything at standing height. But Elfego stayed low, pressed against the earth, and returned fire through cracks in the walls and between the wooden slats. And when he shot, he was devastatingly accurate. While dozens of men failed to hit him even once, Elfego's bullets found their marks with lethal precision. The Cowboys tried everything. They attempted to set the jacal on fire, hoping to smoke him out. The fire wouldn't take. One frustrated cowboy charged forward using a cast-iron stovetop as an improvised shield, only to flee when a bullet creased his scalp, sending blood streaming into his eyes. The Cowboys strung rope between buildings and hung blankets from it, trying to use the fabric as mobile cover to advance closer. That failed too. At one point, according to legend, Elfego set his bullet-riddled hat on top of a plaster statue of a Catholic saint, Nuestra Señora Doña Ana, giving the Cowboys a decoy target they could actually hit. When the siege finally ended and locals explored the ruined structure, they found the statue completely unharmed. To them, this was proof of divine intervention. Elfego had been protected by a miracle, or perhaps by an 18-inch trench and remarkable marksmanship. Throughout the siege, Elfego maintained not just his position, but his composure. During lulls in the firing, he cooked meals. On the second morning, as the sun rose over the Mogollon Rim, the exhausted cowboys who had spent a miserable night sleeping on the cold ground woke to the aroma of steeping coffee and fresh tortillas drifting from the jacal, the smell of Elfego Baca's breakfast. It was psychological warfare of the most infuriating kind. After his meal, he resumed firing. By the end of 33 to 36 hours, sources vary on the exact duration, Elfego had killed 4 men and wounded 8 others. The Cowboys were exhausted, frustrated, and running dangerously low on ammunition. Finally, a local man named Francisquito Naranjo, along with Socorro County Deputy Sheriff Frank Rose, convinced both sides to negotiate. Elfego agreed to surrender on two conditions. First, that he would stand trial in Socorro, not in Frisco, where a lynch mob would almost certainly hang him before sundown. Second, that he could keep his two pistols, his own Colt and Charlie McCarty's confiscated weapon. With both guns in hand and every cowboy's rifle trained on his chest, Elfego slowly walked out of the ruined jacal and approached the buckboard wagon. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Some Hispanic spectators yelled for him to run. He didn't. He climbed into the back of the wagon and sat with his pistols ready, insisting that all accompanying cowboys maintain a distance of at least 30 feet behind for the entire journey to Socorro. Even then, the danger wasn't over. Two separate groups of would-be assassins planned ambushes along the road back to Socorro, but their communications became confused. Each group believed the other had already carried out the hit. Elfego arrived safely. In May of 1885, Elfego Baca was charged with murder for the deaths of young Parham and Bert Hearn. He was jailed for 4 months awaiting trial. In August of 1885, his case finally went before a jury. His defense attorney's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. First, he produced documentation declaring Elfego Baca to be a legally appointed deputy sheriff with full authority to arrest Charlie McCarty, though some historians suggest this documentation may have been falsified. Then came the physical evidence, the door of Geronimo Armijo's jacal. The jury sat in silence, staring at the door. More than 400 bullet holes, a piece of wood so thoroughly destroyed it barely held together, undeniable proof of the extreme danger one young man had faced, alone, for more than 33 hours against dozens of armed attackers. The verdict came swiftly. Not guilty. Elfego Baca walked out of that courtroom a free man and a legend that would endure for over a century. After his acquittal, Elfego was officially appointed sheriff of Socorro County. His approach to law enforcement became as famous as the shootout itself. Instead of sending deputies to chase down wanted men, Sheriff Baca sent letters. His correspondence was brief, direct, and terrifyingly effective. "I have a warrant here for your arrest. Please come in by date and give yourself up. If you don't, I'll know you intend to resist arrest, and I will feel justified in shooting you on sight when I come after you. Yours truly, Elfego Baca." Because of his reputation, the 5'7" Mexican who survived thousands of bullets, most offenders turned themselves in voluntarily rather than face him. Elfego Baca went on to have a remarkably varied career. He became a U.S. Marshal in 1888. He studied law and passed the bar examination in December of 1894, establishing a practice that would span decades. As an attorney, he defended 30 people charged with murder over his career, and only one went to the penitentiary. He worked as mayor and school superintendent of Socorro County. He served as district attorney for Socorro and Sierra counties. He even worked as a special representative for the Mexican government during the bloody chaos of the Mexican Revolution. Throughout his life, Elfego Baca remained controversial. His biographer, Leon Metz, wrote honestly, "Elfego was and is controversial. He drank too much, talked too much, had a weakness for wild women. He was often arrogant and showed no compunction about killing people." On his 75th birthday in 1940, Baca gave an interview to the Albuquerque Tribune. When asked about his violent past, he stated simply, "I never wanted to kill anybody, but if a man had it in his mind to kill me, I made it my business to get him first." Elfego Baca died on August 27, 1945, at the age of 80. But his legend would only grow larger in death than it had been in life. Today, in Reserve, New Mexico, formerly known as Frisco, a bronze statue by sculptor James Moore stands at the exact spot where Geronimo Armijo's jacal once stood. The monument is titled "One Man, One War." The statue shows young Elfego wearing one gun belt around his waist with a drop-loop holster for his Colt single-action revolver and a second gun belt worn bandolier style over his shoulder, a common practice when facing overwhelming odds and uncertain how many bullets survival would require. The plaque nearby recounts the story that transformed a teenage store clerk into a folk hero. A 19-year-old, 5'7" lawman who faced down dozens of angry cowboys for more than 33 hours, survived thousands of rounds of gunfire, killed 4 attackers, wounded 8 others, and walked away without a scratch. The Frisco Shootout represents something that resonates across generations. It's the story of the individual standing against overwhelming odds. It's David facing Goliath. It's the underdog who refuses to back down, no matter the cost. But it's also a story anchored in a specific time and place. It's about ethnic tensions on the American frontier, where Hispanic New Mexicans who had lived on the land for 2 centuries suddenly found themselves marginalized by newly arrived Anglo cattlemen. It's about a young man who refused to accept that intimidation and violence should go unanswered simply because the perpetrators were numerous, well-connected, and armed to the teeth. Elfego Baca wasn't perfect. He was arrogant, reckless, and often operated in legal gray areas throughout his long life. But during those desperate hours in 1884, trapped in that fragile adobe hut, he demonstrated a kind of courage that transcends perfection, outnumbered at least 40-1, surrounded by men determined to kill him, with no reinforcements, no escape route, and no guarantee he would survive the next minute, let alone the next hour. And yet, he held his ground. When historians asked how he survived, Elfego would smile and credit luck. The floor was low. The cowboys were bad shots. God was watching over him. Maybe all of that was true. Or maybe 19-year-old Elfego Baca was simply too stubborn to die.